Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We talk everything animation here, including 1997's Anastasia, which we'll be getting into right now. I am Melanie Moyer, and today I am joined by Beatriz, Mourad.
Hello!
And as I said, we are discussing 1997's Anastasia.
Woo woo!
Poignant month to be discussing it. As we will get into in a bit, you can find out more about this podcast at overlyanimated.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes at overlyanimated.com/iTunes or on YouTube at overlyanimated.com/YouTube. Alrighty. This is like one of those cultish 90s kids films, I feel like.
Yeah.
Which is pretty great. I own it on Blu-ray because of course I do. I guess we're gonna go into, like, personal histories with it, just because, like, this was a movie I was so obsessed with when I was a kid. I actually used to, like, evidently act out the part where Bartok was, like, talking about how he's gonna beat her up, when he's like, he'll do the ha and the hi, and he does that. Like, my parents were like, you wouldn't stop doing that. So yeah, like, I played that thing into the ground, like, I watched it every single day, and I'm pretty sure that's where my ultimate studying, my concentration in Russian history in college probably came from, was early exposure to that in 1997. What about you?
I mean, again, a 90s kid, and just to explain how insane and how music is the universal language of the world besides math. I had this movie on VHS in Venezuela. This is the movie I was obsessed with before I understood English. And it isn't that, oh, they dubbed it. No. I had, like, just the English dubbed version.
I don't know what's happening, but...
Exactly. But I loved the music. I loved the story. And, like, you know, here's, like, my dark side of my teenage life. Like, as a teenager, my go-to for, like, fanfic, alternative universes was one of them used to be a prince or princess or whatever of some whatever thing. Where does that come from? From the story. And I just was fascinated by the history of this and stuff. And it broke my heart when I realized that, like, this isn't like the actual history. It's kind of like Genovia. I realized it wasn't a true country, and I was like, what is going on? But yeah, it was Mulan. There were just certain specific movies where I was just like this. I would play it to the ground. And, I think of all of them, the music of this film is possibly like the thing that has stayed the most with me. There was a point, like sometimes, like there's moments, like random moments in adulthood, or not even adulthood, like I wouldn't even be thinking about this movie, and I'd be like in high school, not even thinking about it, but then I'd suddenly start humming a tune, and I'm like, where is this song from? And it's Anastasia.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, it's there, and it's kind of crazy how funny, quick little anecdote. I remember being in high school, in a French class, mind you, talking to one of my friends in high school, being like, oh, like, we were talking about musicals or whatever, and then one of them was like, you know what? Disney should make a musical for Anastasia. Why haven't they done it yet? And we were like, yeah, 100%. The girl emailed Disney straight up.
How do you email? Where do you email Disney?
No, like they emailed, like, I don't know, they went to customer service or whatever and then sent an email, or like went to Disney Broadway and then the PR, who knows? Like, we found an email that probably was gonna, like, didn't make sense. And then they were like, we're emailing Disney. And they're like, we really think you should make Anastasia the musical. Not really realizing the fact that Disney didn't make Anastasia. Like, we were just so, it was because it was such a big.
Well, they own it now.
They own it now. Yeah, now. But it was such a big film in our lives to the level of a Disney movie.
Yeah.
Which isn't something a lot of movies can say. You know, like, especially animated films, because Disney does kind of have this kind of monopoly with animated films, especially in terms of just capturing the minds of children and being like, this is one of those movies you will always remember for the rest of your life, which is kind of scary in terms of power and influence, but that's beside the point. Point is, like, rarely does a movie that comes from an outside this kind of house of mouse landscape, rarely does one capture the attention of the youth in that level in terms of just having a cultural imprint. And the fact that this movie did do that Sure, maybe not to the level of Disney, the same level. It's more cultish, but it's still like if I walk to a random woman that was born between like 90 and like 97, and I tell her about Anastasia, she's like, "Girl, I got you. I know exactly what you're talking about."
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because like people always assumed it was a Disney movie. Like it showed up in like. People would be like, "Oh, your top 10 favorite Disney movies," and then you always had that person who would angrily be like, "It's not a Disney movie," which they were right, but, and you know, it's got ties to Disney for sure. Don Bluth and Gary Goldman both, worked on various Disney films before they did Anastasia, over at, Fox. I think I accidentally put DreamWorks in the outline. I meant Fox. 20th Century Fox. And now, obviously, Disney owns Anastasia, because Disney bought Fox. So there you go. She's finally a Disney princess. But I guess for those of you who weren't born in the 90s, or just hate joy and didn't see this movie, this was a 1997 animated film based on the 1956 non-animated film, obviously, of the same name. Both deal with the very popular 20th century urban legend that Anastasia, the youngest daughter of the last Russian emperor, survived the execution of her family. This takes several liberties. But basically the premise of this, and to a certain extent, the 1956, there's differences between them, is that there's this amnesiac Russian woman who is conned into pretending to be Anastasia by these two con men who want the reward money for getting her back to her family from the Dowager Empress, who is like the closest living member of her family. But it turns out that their amnesiac con victim might actually be the Grand Duchess. Wild stuff. You, the audience, obviously know the entire time that she is, so.
Yeah.
It was a wild movie. It's very good.
It was a dark movie. I just finished watching it before we started this recording, and it's some of the imagery is quite strong.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you think too, like, who said that this was a good idea? They're like, we're gonna make this movie that revolves around the axis of it is one of the, like, most horrific revolutions in, like, modern.
But they're going to completely erase the revolution from it. That's how they maneuver their way. They're like, we're not even going to mention the negatives of what led to this. We're not going to talk about the problematic czar. We're just going to fly past it all.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they did. They really... And it's interesting because the thing that they make the villain in this is Rasputin, who's obviously a household name. He's also kind of his own urban legends. People talk about, you know, like, he was a Satan worshiper, yada yada. He was a sorcerer. He apparently was impossible to kill. He's the villain of the first Hellboy movie. You know, all this stuff. So they make him the villain because that's easy, right? He's a very easy to cast villain in an animated film as a sorcerer. And it's, I think about it with this book, by, I can't remember his name. It's called Ghostland, though. And it's this nonfiction book that this man, who was a man, wrote, that basically he went onto all these ghost tours and went into, like, all these places where people had made these stories about ghosts and told, you know, ghost stories and talked about hauntings, and basically would talk about the cultural, historical context around them and why people felt the need to invent these ghost stories. So, like, one big one he talks about is the urban legends about down in, like, sort of the plantation areas in the South. There's one that gets passed around a lot about a female slave who attempts to poison her masters but ends up poisoning the children instead. And her ghost is said to haunt various plantations. And that's not true. Like, that never happened. But he said, we invented it and we tell it because it's easier to make that the focus and that the villain than
talking about slavery.
Yeah. So that's kind of what this film does, is it focuses on this very easy to digest, like, this big target of a person that we want to blame, and not talk about, you know, like, how terrible of a ruler Nicholas was, like, how terrible of a place Russia was at that time. and all this other stuff. So, you know, when you're a kid, and you're like, oh, yeah, like, look at him. Even that's terrifying, though, when in the very beginning, when he, like, when his skin gets ripped off his body, when he's first casting his spell. But yeah, the film opens basically on the 300th anniversary in, like, 1914. 300th anniversary of the Romanovs' rule, and they get attacked by what we would know to be the Bolsheviks, but they get attacked by these angry-looking gentlemen, and Anastasia gets separated from her family because she's going back to get this music box that her grandmother gave her. And this kitchen boy gets her out of the palace by way of, like, a servant's quarters, and she hits her head trying to run for a train, and then it's 10 years later in St. Petersburg, and everyone's like, oh, no, she was never found, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we pick up. But the whole thing is, yeah, like, so they were given a choice, Don Bluth and Gary Goldman, when they were, like, tapped to do a Fox animated film. They were told, you can make an animated version of My Fair Lady, or you can make an animated version of Fox's 1956 film Anastasia. For some reason they chose this.
Well, I mean, in a way, Anastasia they're both kind of very similar in terms of, like, we gotta make a lady out of a woman that's not, you know what I mean? Yeah. Am I thinking of this? Is that My Fair Lady?
Yeah.
You know, so they're kind of similar. Like, they basically wanted a story of, let's make a princess out of someone.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, like, the popular thing in the 90s, right? You had the Disney Renaissance, you had Beauty and the Beast, you had Pocahontas, you had Little Mermaid, you had all these, you know, it was basically the true sort of cultural birth of the Disney princess, so obviously you want to go with, if you can get that story and make it an actual princess, then let's do it. Also, the 90s were a big time for just talking about Anastasia and that whole thing, because A, the Berlin Wall had fallen at the end of the 80s, B, 1991, they discover the bodies and find that Anastasia's is missing. So,
so they're like, oh, this is genius. Yeah. But not only that, but I mean, it kind of, and also just thinking of it from a more creative aspect, I feel like had they done My Fair Lady, it would have been much more restrictive, because My Fair Lady, I feel like it's much more standard of, like, there's a musical, there's already, like, I feel like they couldn't have been as creative with the story, with the music, had they done My Fair Lady.
Yeah. Yeah, this, like, they kind of had an open, I wanted to combine three metaphors there. I was trying to say an open slate, and then I was trying to say an open canvas, a blank.
Blank canvas. They had a blank canvas. They had all the freedom to do what they wanted.
Also, fun fact about this film, you know who ghost wrote some of the script? No longer ghost wrote, because it was revealed, like, back during the 20th anniversary of this. It was Carrie Fisher.
This is why this is a great movie. I was like, when you said ghost wrote, I'm like, if you say Carrie Fisher, I'm going to cry. Yep. Because, like, of course, that's why Anastasia actually sounds like a person. Mm-hmm. And I just, that makes so much sense, and I just miss Carrie so much.
You're okay. She's gonna start crying. So she made some rewrites of the script. Her most, the scene that she had the most influence in, was the scene, leading up to, Journey to the Past. She basically wrote the entire scene where Anya says goodbye to the mean orphanage lady, and then is sitting at the literally the crossroads, and is deciding which road to go down. Like,
I mean, that's such an important section, because that is your introduction to Anya, not to Anastasia, but to Anya, and it has to set up her tone, who she is, like, whatever. Oh,
so there you go. I made your day. But, so that's, like, a good thing to get into then, I guess, is to start off with this, is that a big thing in this film is, like, just sort of a dual identity.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, like, amnesiac storylines are popular, right? Like, people like to do that because there's a lot of, like, tension with that. But it's like, you know, she's lived for 10 years, so she hits her head, she's 8 years old. She lives for 10 years. We're going to get into later also how incredibly historically inaccurate just even that
very inaccurate.
But she lives for 10 years as an orphan in this, like, Russian orphanage outside of St. Petersburg. She becomes 18. Obviously, she's, like, an adult now, so they kick her out of the orphanage, and Comrade Flemenkopf, so named because she coughs, Comrade Flemenkopf, kicks her out, says she got her a job at the fish factory. Go do your Russian duty, comrade. Sayonara. Anya gets to the road where she can go to it literally is a sign, I think, that says fish factory this way. Like, it's not very...
and St. Petersburg that way.
Yeah, it's like a weirdly, like, poignant sign, but yeah, it says fish factory that way, St. Petersburg the other way. And she's trying to figure out which way to go, and she's like, well, I could go there, but also, like, St. Petersburg. Because she knows she was found in St. Petersburg, so she knows she somehow has a tie to St. Petersburg, but she doesn't know what. And she has
the necklace.
Yeah, she's got the necklace that says, Together in Paris, that we know goes with the music box. What music box, by the way, like, whines that way? No music box.
Can I just say, I've wanted a music box like that for so long, and every music box I've come across is of a ballerina or something, and I'm like, no, I want that box so bad.
Yeah, well, you can buy it you can buy them now at the Broadway show.
I'd rather spend my money on a lightsaber or something.
They cost as much as my lightsaber did, so.
See, like, I'd rather spend it on, like, a very fancy lightsaber.
And the reason they are so expensive is because they're all hand-painted.
Oh,
so it's like a whole thing. My friend has one. I did not get that when I went to the show. I got a hoodie. But yeah, so she's like, what do I do? What do I do? And this dog pops up, and basically is like, is like, oh yeah, we're going to St. Petersburg. Like, that's where we're going. Like, let's go. In his, like, chipper dog way.
He doesn't speak. I know this is an animated movie, but he doesn't speak.
Yeah, I should clarify. He doesn't say anything. And then she, has these great pictures. She's like, oh great, a dog wants me to go to St. Petersburg. And she's like, oh, okay. Like, I get it. This is a sign. And then, like, one of the greatest songs of all time happens.
Greatest song. I have yet to hear, I mean, this, to me, rivals Part of Your World. Like, these are, like, the songs that princesses sang when they're about to take on their journey.
Yeah,
like,
this is the I Want song, essentially. But, yeah, so she's been living for 10 years as this person. So she is Anya. Like, that is, and it's interesting because in the film, Meg Ryan, who voices her, is credited as Anastasia. Like, that is how the character is credited. But in the Broadway show, she's credited as Anya, and I think the Broadway show actually goes deeper into the idea of playing with, like, identities there. But yeah, so, like, she's, very different from this girl we met at the beginning of the movie. She's like your typical, like, 90s heroine. Like, it's Meg Ryan, so she's, like, very sassy. She's, like, very street smart for the most part. She's, she's scrappy. She's great.
Like, there's nothing wrong with a 90s heroine. They're great.
No, she's great. It's fantastic. It's so iconic. But yeah, she gets to St. Petersburg where she meets Dmitri, who we recognize immediately as the boy who got her out of the palace. She doesn't know that because she doesn't remember. He doesn't know that because he doesn't actually think she's Anastasia. And she cons her into pretending to be Anastasia. And they go on their whirlwind adventure, chased by Rasputin. Now, the movie that this was based on, the 1956 film, very different, stars Ingrid Bergman.
Oh, wow.
As Anya. It's called Anna here. And she's called that because the character she's playing, or was heavily inspired by, was the real-life woman, Anna Anderson.
Right.
Which we'll get into. But Ingrid Bergman plays Anna, and there are, in the Dmitri character is this Russian general, and then you've got the Vlad character, Vlad being Dmitri's, like, buddy. They're like a dual two partners in crime, as it were. And there's the Vlad character, and then there's the Dowager Empress, and basically they want to get to the $10 million that the Tsar has in his English bank account, now that clearly the Tsar is dead. And they want to they want to take this amnesiac girl and pass her off as the Grand Duchess in front of the Dowager Empress, who is her grandmother. And in this film, they're not as clear about, if she was Anastasia or not. They, like, basically subtly hint throughout the film that she is, but they never definitively say it. And I think that this film, more than anything else, was kind of the influence for, the Broadway version of the animated, Anastasia film.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so I guess one thing I want to get into is, we touched on it a little bit already, but, like, Rasputin is a villain. Just because he has first of all, he has one of the greatest villain songs of all time. In the Dark of the Night. It's excellent.
Yeah.
But, so, he's voiced by Christopher Lloyd, who you will know as, the Doc from Back to the Future, amongst other things. Jim Cummings, however, does his singing. Jim Cummings is a Disney vet. He's appeared in an obnoxious amount of everything, but he's appeared in an obnoxious amount of Disney stuff as well. I think he's the main voice of, who's that mean mouse in the Mickey Mouse? Mortimer. Was it Mortimer? No, it's not Mortimer. It's the big one. He's not a mouse. I think he's a cat.
He's like, yeah.
That guy. He voices that guy. But he provides the singing voice. So, we mentioned Rasputin, like, he's an easy target. He's an easy thing to make a villain. In this, his story is based a little bit on fact, I say with an asterisk. So
I'm curious where you're going with this.
Yes. So Rasputin starts out the movie, he, like, crashes their awesome party, cause he's mad at the Tsar for essentially firing him. Like, so Rasputin in history. Grigory Rasputin was a monk. I don't know if he belonged to even an order or he just called himself a monk, but he was, like, a religious figure who claimed that he could heal, the Tsarevich's hemophilia. The youngest child and the only son of the Tsar and his wife, had hemophilia, which was a common disease amongst the royal family because everyone was marrying everyone in Europe, so they were all passing hemophilia.
The Queen of England is related to the Tsar, her family was related to the Tsar. Like, she's everybody. She's the grandmother, she married her, of his wife. Yeah, like, everybody's, like, she married her cousin. Like, and basically everyone of, like, the royal families in Europe are related to Queen Victoria.
Prince Philip's DNA was used to identify the Romanov bodies.
Like,
let's do that way.
Again, all, like, you know how all roads lead to Rome? All bloodlines of royalty lead to Queen Victoria.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of her granddaughters was, the Tsar's wife. But yeah, so she gave everyone hemophilia. The boy has it because it only affects boys. Women carry it, but it only affects boys. It's that kind of disease. Which isn't great for a country where they have male preference for ruling. Yeah. So yeah, Rasputin says, I can heal him. And apparently he could, like, to the extent that, like, you know, he was just good at calming the kid down. Who knows what actually happened? I wasn't there. No one else who's alive today was there, but, you know, supposedly he had some positive effect. The Tsar and his wife kept him around because they were really nervous that they were going to lose their only, like, actual heir. And then people didn't like Rasputin because he was, like, a very scandalous person. He was, like, you know, going to brothels and drinking. Like, he was a really great monk. Basically, they dismiss him from court just because it's like he's very unpopular with everyone. And Rasputin was like, okay. And this thing that he says to Nicholas after that is, like, kind of where the movie, like went crazy with, like, one thing he said. So he basically wrote a letter to Nicholas where he said, if a member of your family is responsible for my death, then you and your family will be dead within 2 years. He said it as, like, a prophecy, not as, like, a threat. So they took that and turned it into Rasputin, who, like, you know, goes up to the Tsar at this party. He's like, you and your family, and he, like, curses them and stuff, and then walks out. That did happen. Count Yusupov did, or Prince Yusupov, I guess, did kill Rasputin, and the Romanovs did die within 2 years, but I think anyone who was paying attention to the newspapers could have told you.
Yeah, that was going to happen.
But whatever. But yeah, they use that as kind of their jumping off point for this character he sells his soul to, like, these unidentified demonic entities in exchange for, like, the power to destroy the Romanovs, quote unquote. And they kind of say, oh, Rasputin started the revolution. That's what it was. This thing had been brewing in Russia for centuries.
So long.
Yeah.
But they're like, no, well, magic made people mad. It's not, like, why would they ever want to overthrow the royal family? Like, of course they needed magic to influence them to do something so atrocious, because no human would actually want to do that. Like,
it's like wishful thinking, right?
Yep.
It's like Wonder Woman with Ares.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
That's exactly it.
So Rasputin supposedly dies that night. He like falls under the ice on the Neva, I think is the river. But we find out he's not dead, because once Anastasia or Anya, like, she comes back to the palace, and the reliquary that he used to, like, cause the revolution, it's weird, comes back to life, and we see, he's in this scary-looking purgatory at the center of the earth. It's horrific. The entire sequence going down there is really scary, but basically he's like, I can't rest until my curse is finished and the last Romanov is killed, because she's the one that got away. So he decides he's gonna to stalk this girl across the countries that she's running from Russia to France, and try and kill her. Now, the most poignant of these, and the thing that I'm still, like, shocked, is the sequence on the boat. So, Rasputin makes these attempts, he tries to blow up their train, he tries, like, all these other stuff, but on the boat, that scene, like, still to this day I make comments about it where I'm like, wow, like, nobody talks about how dark this entire thing was.
Yeah.
Because he essentially attempts to get her to commit suicide.
And in the worst way, because he's tempting her through her family. Mm-hmm. You know, like, they're saying, come, join us, as if it's, like, some weird kind of transition to, like, heaven or something. They're like, come, join us, and blah, and it's like, whoa. Because, I mean, also, like, there's a lot of religious imagery all throughout, which is very interesting, decision. But anyway, so it was just, like, very, like, I remember watching this and being like, there's a reason why my young mind forgot about this scene.
Yeah. Yes, he puts a dream in her head that she's, like, having a picnic swim with her family, and they're like, oh, jump into the water, like, come jump into the water with us.
And just before that, her little brother is like standing next to her, and he's like, look, I'm gonna jump too, and you essentially see him commit suicide, essentially.
Yeah, you're like, oh my god, don't jump.
Yeah, like, you see the kid jump, and you're like, he just killed himself.
That's like the very beginning of the show when he falls. And I was like the only one who reacted in the theater. But yeah, no, it's the part though, like you mentioned, the religious imagery is like, okay, yeah, it's like heaven, they're beckoning her down. When she starts to when she starts to turn away because Dimitri's trying to grab her to get her to, not jump off the boat. And they turn into demons.
Yeah. And it's like also interesting, like, heaven, yet they're below her. Mm-hmm. Right? So obviously there's already something off in terms of, like, what's below.
Yeah.
Hell. So, and then he turns into a demon and goes like, come down. And so it was, I mean, it's a great scene. It's beautifully done and terrifying. Like, you genuinely, it's not like they're romanticizing it or playing like this sort of like, oh, like this is so lighthearted. Like it is like a very intense scene, but also, wow.
Yeah, no, and it's this thing that you don't clock when you're a kid, because you're just like, oh, wow, that was really scary. But, like, the adults who made this had to know what they were doing, and me, the adult, watching it again is like, oh my god, like, that was in a film that I regularly watched when I was a child. They tried to get their main character to, jump off a boat into the ocean. So, like, and that's, like, the rest of the movie, he's, like, a little bit comedic, because he has this back and forth with his, like, little bat companion.
This little bat.
Yeah.
Who got his own movie.
He did. It comes with the Blu-ray now.
Of course it does.
But yeah, and, like, the ending scene with him is still pretty scary, because he, like, lures her into this hedge maze, and, like, traps her on the Pont Alexander III. I have no French accent. The bridge, ironically named for her great-grandfather. But, it's like, Rasputin's a scary villain. Like, he's designed freaky, he tries to get when blowing up the train didn't work, he tried to get her to kill herself. When that didn't work.
Yeah. He decides to kill her with his bare hands.
Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna lure her from this party, nobody else is around, and I'm just gonna straight up smother her and throw her in the river, and that'll be that. Like, it's horrific. Which, you know, I guess is, like, maybe where a little bit of the revolution and the real horrors of this story kind of start to bleed in, right? Like, there's really no escaping, the very dark essence of all of this. Even if you dress it up as, like, a Disney sorcerer villain, it's still, like, very, very personal and very brutal. But, yeah, he was always... Oh, J.K. Simmons was an extra voice in this movie. Good for him.
That's... Who? What would he do?
It just says he was, like,
additional voice.
Yeah. Angela Lansbury was the Dowager Empress.
That makes sense. I was like, I know this voice. I know this voice very well.
Yeah. John Cusack was Dimitri. He did not provide the singing voice.
Neither did Meg Ryan.
No,
that was Liz Calloway, I think.
It was, and you know who voiced young Anastasia was Kirsten Dunst.
Really? Oh, but the singing
was not her.
It was Lacey Shepard who voiced Eliza from The Wild Thornberrys, and more importantly,
Mean Girls.
From Mean Girls.
Yeah.
Fetch. What's her name? Gretchen. Gretchen Weir's from Fetch.
Fetch.
From Mean Girls. Who says Fetch?
Yes. Lacey Shepard was the singing voice of young Anastasia. Kirsten Dunst was the speaking voice. Liz Calloway was the singing voice of adult Anastasia, and Meg Ryan was the voice of adult Anastasia. Like, sure.
Wonderful cast. Like, wonderful cast.
For this one character, and it's great. But yeah, John Cusack was Dimitri. Jonathan Daku Schitz. I don't know. Daku Schitz. I'm saying his name so wrong. Voiced Dimitri. Or did Dimitri's singing voice, rather. Kelsey Grammer did the singing and speaking voice for Vlad. We mentioned Gregory Rasputin. We mentioned Christopher Lloyd and Jim Cummings. Hank Azaria was Bartok, if that tells you anything about that bat right there. Bernadette Peters was Sophie. Which is nice. Yeah. Which you can kind of get, I guess, if you think about it. But yeah, so these are all the voices. The music. So you mentioned this a little bit. This is kind of like what the big allure of the movie is, I feel like. So let's discuss the music. So
it's just so good.
It is.
And I don't think anyone expected it to be as good as it was.
No. It was done by Lynn Ahrens and Stephen Flattery, who combined have worked on various things that include, Lynn Ahrens did Ragtime, she did Once on This Island, she did Seussical, she did The Glorious Ones. Stephen Flattery was involved in Seussical as well, and Ragtime. They're like, before this, they were like very like, those are shows like Ragtime and Seussical, like those shows are very much like Broadway, like state, like Drama Club. You know, you've done those shows. You've been in those shows. They're kind of staples and stuff. That being said, I don't think any of the music that they've done up into this, although Once on This Island is very good, I don't think any of the music they've done up into this point was like, as like potent as what they did for this movie. I'm sure that, you know, earns the ire of a lot of like traditionalists on the Broadway subreddit, but like Rumor in St. Petersburg, I just reblogged something on Tumblr the other day, actually, that was like this, it was like a seagull freaking out singing Rumor in St. Petersburg, because you always had your part where you were like, you're that one peasant. You're like, no, this is my line. When the one peasant is like, "Comrade, what do you suppose?" and like stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's a great opening number. That really cast an interesting light on the sort of dregs of, as it was called, Leningrad at that time.
All right. Hot take. This is better than the opening of Beauty and the Beast. The bonjour, bonjour.
Yeah, no,
it's totally.
Yeah. No, and it's
totally
a similar thing, right? Like it takes a similar approach to it. I think I do think it does better than the opening of Beauty and the Beast. And yeah, I love singing "Rumor in St. Petersburg." That was my caption on my picture when I went to the show. But the big song, as we mentioned, "Journey to the Past," is one of two huge songs. This is probably the more famous one, just because it was kind of the anthem song of the movie. It was their credit song and stuff. But basically, it's her "I Want" song. It's the song she sings on her way to St. Petersburg, where she's like, maybe I'll find my family and everything will be great. And it's just a great song. And a lot of people have actually like kind of talked about it culturally now in terms of like how big it was and how big it continued to be as a predecessor to "Let It Go."
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, there's
not like, okay, well, but because I always assume that often the connection I see with people is, at least in terms of a Disney discography, they always compare "Part of Your World" maybe to "Let It Go," not necessarily "Journey to the Past."
Well, so the reason, the point that it was Entertainment Weekly that had like an opinion piece about this, the big point that they were making was like, because you could hear the beginning notes of "Journey to the Past" and know immediately what song it was, the same way like you hear the beginning of "Let It Go" and you're like, oh, here it comes. And basically, like, retrospectively, the New York Times called "Journey to the Past" the "Let It Go" of the 90s.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, again, "Part of Your World" was 89, so it could still be of the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah, so there you go. That was of the 80s. But they were like, retrospectively, people have looked at "Journey to the Past" and they were like, yes, like, this is the one way we can describe how, like, potent this song is like "Let It Go." Like it was "Let It Go" for the 90s.
Maybe it's because we were kids when this came out, but were parents and adults annoyed by "Journey to the Past"? Like they weren't "Let It Go"?
According to New York Times, it was like very much like they called it a quote unquote earworm song. Because you hear it and you're just like, oh, it's in my head now. And it was they were also, something interesting New York Times pointed out about this song was that it was a big, well, not was, I think it still is. I don't know exactly what time period they were making this claim for, but they said it was a quote-unquote much-loved anthem to immigrant audiences. That
makes all the sense in the world now. As an immigrant,
say, can you shed some light on that?
Suddenly, my life is kind of falling into place now.
It all makes sense.
I'm like, no wonder.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a really big song, and it was a really big song, and it still is. And it's funny because, you know, when I went to go see the Broadway show, and we'll talk a little bit about how they restructure this to make it palatable for the stage, but they do it as the Act 1 closer, and you know, like, it starts, right? Like, they're like, do, 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 you know, it starts, and everyone, you can just hear it, everyone's like, oh yeah, like, this is it, guys, like, everyone get ready. You know, and they do it, and everyone cheers, and I was, like, in line for the bathroom, and this, like, we're not talking, because we're pissed that we're in line for the bathroom, and this woman just starts, like, humming in line for the bathroom, and I was like, yes, correct. I'm gonna go back to my seat now. So yeah, this song is, like, ridiculous. Like, I never change it if it comes on. Like, if it's on, it's staying on. And, you know, it's very uplifting and great, and it's kind of the tune for the rest of the movie. They do use the Once Upon a December, they do use the lullaby, or the
reprise of it, I guess.
Yeah, whatever, the music box is what it's called. Yeah. They use that a lot, but Journey to the Past is, like, the emotional heart of this movie.
Yeah.
But going into Once Upon a December, this is, like, the haunting, like, it's so, like, you compare that to Let It Go. I don't know what I'd compare this to.
This would be, okay, Once Upon a December would be, in a way, it would be kind of like the For the First Time in Forever like duet reprise thing, kind of, in terms of the hauntedness, in terms of like you have two people singing it, and then both in terms of like they're kind of, if you put like, okay, kind of, it's the first time in forever, I think is the name of it. For the first time like in forever, whatever. For the first time, I guess. Well, it's like you have the grandmother singing it, and then you have her singing it, and then you have her singing a full version, and you have them at the end coming together to sing it again. I don't know. There is a hauntingness to it that just fits this movie so well, because it is dark, and there's just this kind of, and again, because of the historical baggage that the story deals with, there is this shadow that is just constantly present throughout this movie, especially for people who are aware of the context and everything that happened in this story in reality. So there is this kind of constant shadow, this tension, and it of course, like the only thing that would fit is to also have a song, not just Journey to the Past, but also a song that captures that kind of tragedy, that kind of angst of everything that's happening, and that's Once Upon a December. Yeah, and it's brilliant that it's once upon a time. It's like, it's like, oh, that's like the fairy tale opening, and it's like, no, this is in December. No, it's
in the middle of winter. Yeah. There's definitely a darkness to it, and it kind of recalls just the idea of like the legend too, and like the mystery that everyone created around this thing. But the sequence that the song takes place in is probably one of the greatest sequences in animated film. I'm just gonna say.
I mean, it is stunning.
Yeah. That was another thing. My parents were like, you just used to replay that and replay that and replay that. So basically the context is that Anya goes to one of the palaces. I can't remember if it's the Catherine Palace or the Peterhof Palace, but she goes to one of the palaces in St. Petersburg, breaks in, first of all. But it's communist Russia. Everything belongs to everyone. So she breaks in, and she's like, oh, I've been in here before. This is familiar to me. And she starts singing a version of the lullaby from the music box. But it's, these haunting words about wanting to remember, and there's something about this in my past, and yada yada. And then when we get to like the bass drop, as I'll call it, of this song. Yeah, like these ghosts just burst out of the paintings.
And there's haunting. They're like, oh, like it's all operatic at one point.
Yeah, like there's these operatic singing ensemble ghosts that burst out of the painting. They're all dancing like it's meant to be like this, these ghosts of Russia's imperial past. And then her family comes out of their own painting. They've got a painting, and her family comes out, her sisters and her brother and her mom and dad come out, and they walk up to her, and she dances with her dad, and it's so sad. And she dances with her sisters, and it's all just so gut-wrenching. And then the second this song's over, like when Dimitri goes, hey, and it just vanishes. I meant to snap wait. It just vanishes. And goes back into this cobweb covered palace. Like the entire thing is just like ridiculously beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, and again, the imagery, there's so much meaning in it. In terms, I mean, there's just to keep on adding to this kind of haunting tune of the song. It's not just like this kind of myth, this legend. It's this dark, one of the bloodiest moments. It's regicide.
Yeah.
And it's all these people, all these ghosts of her past, but there is this kind of, in a way, it's kind of like a warning that the movie never really dives into, because it's not that type of movie. But it never really kind of sinks in of, oh, right, all these people, there is this darkness of what happened to her family, and to all these people who were straight up murdered and executed in the bloodiest of ways. And it's just the image of like having it be ghosts. Like it's, I don't know. It's just, it's one of those, I mean, yes, Journey to the Past may be the heart and soul of the movie in terms of of the movie, but Once Upon December and this sequence that is paired with it is kind of the, in the movie, this is the essence of the Anastasia story, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Of just in general, of like the history and story. Like there's a moment that kind of deals with the kind of tries to engage with the history and tries to balance it out with the animation, it is this sequence.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just the whole thing is very incredible. Yeah, we talked about it in the Dark of the Night. Great villain song. Ridiculous. There's bugs that are his, like, backup singers. It's crazy. The only other, like, big songs after that, the songs kind of, like, go downhill. There's always, like, that big peak, and then everything else is kind of chill. Although Paris Holds the Key to Your Heart is fun because there's a lot of cameos of people who were not in Paris at the same time, but were famous for having lived in Paris. Like, Gertrude Stein is there, Freud, Coco Chanel. It's really funny. And you can, like, you start to pick them out, and so that's kind of fun. But the credit song at the beginning is, like, another one of those, like, 90s kids anthems, I feel like. It was performed by Donna Lewis and Richard Marx, and it was meant to be the credits duet. And it's funny because it's, like, the way they do the credits of this song, it's like an AMV. Like, they invented the AMV.
AMV, yeah.
Because they before they start the credits, it's like a solid 30 seconds of just shots of the movie set to this song. It's funky. But that's a good one too. And, the current Anya and Dimitri on Broadway actually recorded a studio duet.
They did!
Yeah.
See, that was something that was disappointing that they didn't do in the movie. I was like, I guess obviously, like, musically it doesn't make sense and it's off, like, musically, but also, like, they should have put it in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now you have a studio version with...
Oh my god, I'm looking it up.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. But yeah, so the music is incredible. Like, even the David Newman score is incredible as well. It ranges from haunting and, like, it's very choral. It kind of reminds me at times of Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes.
With a lot of choral voices, chanting and that sort of thing. But then you've also got kind of this light, like, oh, Gay Paris and, like, stuff like that going on. Because that's kind of the juxtaposition that the Broadway show plays with. Where they, like, set half the film in dreary, or half the show in dreary St. Petersburg and the other half in, like, lush, bright Paris. So, the historical accuracy of this film.
Oh, we're gonna go there.
Is not super present. I don't know where to start with this.
It's not, it's just, they decided, look, I appreciate, because I hate when people try to do, like, okay, let's try to be historically accurate for some things, but for some other things, let's not. It's like, no, either run with the fiction or stick to the script. And they decided to run with the fantasy, and I just commend them for that.
Well, we're committed.
Exactly. I'm like, all right, good on you. Like, we know it's fiction, great. But I think, in a way, this story allows for that. Because, obviously, we don't know 100% for certain. Like, well, now we do. Now, I think
we're pretty sure we know.
Now we know, like, no, because wasn't there, like, recently there was, like, news that they had found her body, like, the DNA of her and her sister or something?
I will get into part of the debate still going around.
Okay. All right. Well, 95% sure?
Yeah, more than that. We're like
99.999% sure that, like, she did perish with her family that night. But, even at that time, like, there is this kind of, but think in the mindset of the 90s when we didn't know. Like, there is this kind of, like, she maybe not, maybe so, and it's, like, kind of leaning into that kind of gray era of not really knowing the truth. Oh my god, it came to me. This is a great, this movie, there is a link that should be, there is a reading of this movie in relation to now and fake news and all that stuff. There is a link that to be made there. And, like, what we do with truth and how we handle truth is what I mean. Not in terms of, like,
I got you. That's a reading for sure.
Yeah, like, how do we deal with something that we can't 100% confirm, something that's kind of lost in history, and how do we let our minds kind of run off with fantasy to fill in these gaps, to try and actually find an answer? when there's a million people telling us what happened.
I like that we got to witness your epiphany about this.
I'm glad too. See, guys, I can come up with the occasional smart idea.
Nice.
But yeah, so in a way, it works with this movie. Like, if had it been any other historical moment that I don't know, that we know for fact happened, then sure, taking some historical inaccuracies wouldn't have worked. But because of this, because they did have that kind of grayness, it allowed for it. Now, do I still think that they should have been a little bit more historically accurate in terms of like, because personally, I mean, yeah, he had a great song, but I think Rasputin was the weakest part of this movie. I think the villain, like all the mystical stuff wasn't interesting. I was interested in her, in everything but him. I was like all game for. So would I have preferred her, like the villain or whoever, have been something else, something different? Sure. But at the same time, like, I can't blame the movie for historical inaccuracies, because that's the whole point of this story, is not knowing what happened.
Yeah. Yes. All of that.
That was a lot, sorry.
Yeah, no, like, yeah, all those points, I'm with you, right? And they knew that they had to, like, they're making a fairy tale, so it has to be a fairy tale. So they didn't set out and say, we're going to change this. They just had to mold things to fit the story that they were telling.
Right.
Which is why, rather than saying that this is based on, and even the Broadway show doesn't say that it's based on the life of Anastasia or anything like that, it says it's based on the legend. There's a plaque outside the theater that says, adapting a legend and that sort of thing, and that this is about that, not so much the actual events. Yeah. Now, some, quick spark notes on what was, the timing is wrong. Anastasia would have been 28 instead of 18, historically, because she was 18 when she died. They kind of conflate a couple things at once, because there was more than one revolution in Russia. And the first one, I forget which one it is. The February Revolution basically took place right after World War I, and it established the Duma, which was basically their version of a sort of congressional body. And they're conflating that with the second revolution, which is the one that actually ended up overthrowing everything and killing the Tsar. But
didn't that one happen in like July?
Yeah.
Something?
Well, they were killed in July.
Yeah, but even then, like, I think the movie made it seem like this all happened in one night, whereas they were actually held hostage for like 6 months or something, or like for 3 months.
Yeah.
There was a story where, like, I think the King of England could have gotten them out or something at one point, but then they didn't, and then it happened. It was
so this is what happens is Romanov's turned 300, revolution, we go another 4 years, it's uneasy. Second revolution happens. Doesn't end so great. So at this point, they're older. Anastasia's obviously not a child anymore. So they are put under house arrest in their own palace. They live there for a little bit. And it's actually not that terrible of a time. The guards are pretty nice. But then they are told they're being shipped off to Siberia. Because originally they were trying to just exile them. They're like, yeah, just get out of Russia. Like, they were going to send them to King George, who is the cousin of the Tsar. And if you look at pictures, they look ridiculously alike. It was kind of like a family joke.
Alike.
That they, like, there was one day where there's a picture of them where they switch clothes. Like, they, like, did it as, like, a thing. Like, they're wearing each other's, like, royal regalia, and it's hysterical. But he doesn't take them. Because he's afraid of what it's going to mean for his country, what it's going to cause. We just got out of World War I.
And not just that, but also they were giving him a lot of flack because his family is more Germanic. So there was also like tension in the UK of should we listen to this king that may not be ethnically English in a way? So there was also that happening.
Yeah. So there's a lot of political reasons and social reasons he just couldn't do it. So he denies them asylum. Unable to get them out of the country and put them somewhere, they decide to ship them off to Siberia with much less nice caretakers out in the Ural Soviet. And basically for over a year, they're just carted around under house arrest in different places, just kind of existing while the government is trying to form itself back in St. Petersburg and Moscow and trying to figure out what to do with them. Ultimately, they end up at this house in Yekaterinburg, the Epitaph House, where it's July. It's July 1918, 100 years ago, almost to the day that this podcast is recorded. It was last Tuesday, I think, was the actual, day anniversary. They're at the house. The White Army, the Russian White Army, is getting close. It's making the Soviets nervous. Lenin just says, do it. Then this whole thing is like I don't even want to call it a comedy of errors, because it's obviously not funny, but that's kind of, this whole thing was like a mess. Basically, because they're like, all right, we don't know which ones to kill. Like, do we just kill the Tsar and let his kids and his wife go? Do we kill the Tsar and his wife? Well, we have to kill the boy because he's the heir. But do we let the youngest daughter go because she's technically still a child? Like, would they were, and they're like, all right, no, we're just going to kill them all. So, they wake them up in the middle of the night, take them down to the basement and say, we're moving you because the fighting's getting too close. We're going to take a picture before you leave. And they set everyone up.
Oh my God.
And the Tsar sits. He asks for a chair. And they kind of make fun of him, but they bring in a chair. Alexei sits on his knee. His family stands behind him, and instead of a camera, in walks a firing squad and just, without much fanfare, just goes about their task. The girls had sewn jewels into their clothes to avoid thieves. The result of having, a sheet of diamonds in your clothing is that it was essentially a bulletproof vest. So they weren't being affected by the gunfire. They found different ways to go about that. Eventually, they all were executed. Now, the importance of the jewelry is that that's where part of this story starts, is because the girls did not immediately pass away. As a result, it took several hours, and the bodies were left alone. So that's where this starts, is that there was a window where this could have happened. The second thing that happens is the Soviet government never formally acknowledges that this happened, because they can't, because they just got out of war with Germany. They just killed a German princess. Germany is asking, they sent them a telegram, said, give us all the princesses of German blood, meaning Alexandra and her daughters. They're already deceased. So they're like, crap. We can't do it. We just signed a peace treaty. So they never formally acknowledged that this happened, that they did this. They're just hoping people will forget about the Romanovs, that they, went off to Siberia, right, and that'll be that. That backfires on them spectacularly, because people filled in the gaps themselves. They were like, oh my God, I saw them on a train. They were asking about an Anastasia Romanov, yada yada, all these rumors, literally rumor in St. Petersburg. All these rumors are flying. In Berlin, a couple years later, it's 1921, a woman is taken into an asylum after she jumps off a bridge into a canal and is fished out by the police and taken to an asylum. She doesn't give her name or anything like that. She refuses to speak, so they drop her in the asylum. That's that. And a fellow patient looks at her and says, that's the Grand Duchess Tatiana. That's the Grand Duchess Tatiana, who is the second oldest of the Tsar's daughters. The woman denies being Tatiana. She says, I'm not Tatiana. I'm not that Grand Duchess. Instead, she claims that she's Anastasia. She doesn't look like her. People thought she did. I don't see it. I've seen pictures of her. But this blows up. This becomes the thing that people attach to. Is everyone's like, oh, they found Anastasia in Berlin. Her family comes to see her to see if it's her. People are saying, yes, it's her. There were 2 court cases in Berlin where she was trying to legally prove that she was Anastasia, and they were like, well, you couldn't prove it, but your detractors also couldn't prove that you're not. So that's our ruling, is that, which, okay. Court cases in Berlin. It goes on. She ultimately, dies, having never been, formally recognized as Anastasia. Now, the thing here about this, and this is why this caught so much attention, is because, we're in post-World War I Europe, and people want the fairy tale. People want to believe that this is possible, that this happened, that somebody survived this, and look, it's a lost princess. This is literally something out of a fairy tale. So people attach to that, because that's safer than acknowledging what actually happened. But she eventually moves to America, passes away, is buried under the name Anastasia, but post-mortem DNA analysis says that she is, I cannot say her name, Franziska Schwash, something like that. She was a Polish factory worker, basically, who ran away around the time that this woman was plucked out of a canal in Berlin. She's not the only woman to claim to be Anastasia. She was the first, though, and she was the most famous, and she's the one who most stories are based on, including this one. We get to, 1989, Berlin Wall comes down, Eastern Bloc disbanded. They can actually start looking and talking about, the bodies, right? The Romanovs. And, where they were buried was a common site where, Stalin buried a lot of his political victims, so it was a little bit of a minefield to go through. 1991, they find the bodies. All except two. Alexei and Anastasia's body are missing. Now, the archaeologists who found this expected that, because according to the journals written by the dudes involved in the execution, they purposefully took two of the bodies and buried them somewhere else to prevent them from being identified, because they thought it would make people, if they found two parents and this many kids they'd know exactly who they were, so they separated the bodies to make them harder to identify. So they knew that they were out there, they just didn't know where they were. The public doesn't know this, though, so they're like, oh my god, it's true. It's wild. They're losing their minds in the 90s over this. It's insane. It takes them almost 20 years to find the other two bodies. And what they find are partial remains. They found very small fragments of remains. So they haven't found bodies, but they find these, they test them, they match to the other bodies they found, so these are family members of the people who were the other ones. They say, okay, great, we've reunited them. It's terrible. She died, they all died, but we've reunited this family. However, there's debate about
Of course there is. Yeah, once we have a fantasy, once we have a myth, a legend, an idea, we are not going to let it go easily.
Yeah, people are not letting it go easily. The Russian church refuses to acknowledge that these are her actual remains, that they are
Really?
Alexei's. Why? They don't, there's something about the way that they were found and, tested that the Russian Orthodox Church refuses to. Part of the reason they do this is because the Romanovs, the imperial family, were canonized. So they have a very strict way about identifying holy relics of the remains of saints. So they refuse to acknowledge that these are her remains or Alexei's remains. The DNA is still being tested as of 2017, February 2017, so a little over a year ago. Which is over 10 years, or just about 10 years after it was initially found. They're still testing it in various independent labs because people just won't let it go. Yeah. People won't let it go.
They won't let go of their journey to the past. Boom!
There you go. Boom. So this film's place in 20th Century Fox's canon of animated films. So the thing that annoys me is after this movie, 20th Century Fox keeps making the same male character over and over again. Have you noticed that?
I mean, what other I'm not as familiar with the 20th Century Fox canon.
So
like, what other...
What is the other movie I am thinking of? There's a movie they made shortly after this that was a sci-fi film that featured a character that was basically a blonde version of Dimitri. I'm trying to remember what it was called.
Because I feel like Dimitri is the prototype, and this isn't like an intentional thing, but I do think he is the prototype for Flynn in Tangled.
Yeah. Listen, Dimitri was everyone's first. Titan A! That's what it was. Dimitri was everyone's first animation crush.
And it says a lot about me that I didn't want to be Anastasia, I wanted to be Dimitri.
I know, right? I was like, yeah, no, that's the guy I want to be.
We need to talk about one thing that we kind of brushed past when involving Dimitri.
Mm-hmm.
This is possibly the greatest animated kiss of all animated kisses.
They go into it.
Like, it's everything. It's like from the spinning around to like
they're open mouth and everything.
Like the frame moving with them. Like, it is. I wouldn't be surprised if they just got two actors, told them kiss, and then they just kind of did like a Periscope kind of thing where they were just like, we gotta trace these. But it is there. I have yet to find another kiss that has been as kind of swoon worthy, as breathtaking in a way. Even in some live action movies haven't matched up to it. Like I'm like, this is a proper kiss.
Yeah, no, it is. It really ruins all other animated kisses for you.
And if anyone is not familiar with Anastasia and are still listening to this podcast, you can thank this movie for that amazing Korosami gift.
Yeah, the Korosami is just
Korosami gift.
Yeah.
Like, that is based on this kiss.
Yeah, it's
that good of a kiss.
It's that kiss exactly, actually.
Yeah, they like basically like copied it just for funsies.
Yeah, for funsies. But Titan A was the film I was thinking of. It came out 3 years after Anastasia. It's like this really dark, really scary, actually, even animated film, like set in like the year like 30 something, like 3020 something. And basically it's a deep space film, and they've got like DNA of all of planet Earth, and they're going to use it to seed a new planet. And there's this character, Cale Tucker, who look him up. He looks exactly like Dimitri. He's like the same animation. He was voiced by Matt Damon. And that kind of bugged me, because they did, like, I was like, come on, you can come up with more than one male hero. But Anastasia Bartok the Magnificent, which is the spin-off.
Oh, wow. I remember him.
Oh, did you
right.
Google him?
Yeah, I just Googled him. You're right. It is Dimitri.
Yeah, it's basically Dimitri. That and Titan A are the only 3 films under Fox Animation Studios. After that, they moved to Blue Sky. Fox bought Blue Sky, so basically everything they did after that was Blue Sky, so that's Ice Age, Rio, Epic, which was actually a pretty good movie, Ferdinand, various others. They are also affiliated with The Book of Life, and a couple others. So they've got their fingers in many pies. But yeah, this was kind of the big film for Fox Animation, because after that, I don't think anything really compared to this. And yeah, Titan A stole Dimitri's rigging, basically. Did they have rigs back then in 2D animation? I don't think they did. I think it was just...
They just were like, we want that.
Yeah, they're like, we're just going to redraw that. But yeah, Fern Gully is somehow also associated with 20th Century Fox. I don't know. I think they distribute it. They didn't produce it, but they distributed it. Fern Gully's great. It was Avatar before Avatar. Word for word. But yeah, 20th Century Fox didn't do too much great big animation after that. I mean, Ice Age was pretty good, I guess. But that has since turned into Shrek, where it's like, alright, we get it. But,
Shrek.
But yeah. The only other thing is like, so now it's a Broadway show. We've both seen it, so I feel like we should briefly gloss over it. It's interesting because I think about it in terms of like the only other thing I can think of with animated films becoming Broadway shows is Disney, which literally just plucks its movies and puts them on stage. Yeah. This made a lot of changes.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the changes. I do, because this actually attempts to fix the historical inaccuracies. And, you know, we early on in the podcast, we talked about duality and identity, dual identity rather. And, you know, the thing in the movie is that, you know, all her family members are gone. Like, there is no one to hold her accountable into, like, who was she before and who is she now and how do you merge the two? Like, they don't deal with that. Mm-hmm. Versus in the musical they do, in the Broadway show. And part of it is because they're actually talking about what happened in history and they're actually remembering the past. It's not so much, you know, it's not glossed over. It's not something that is not that is kind of missing, because that is what in the movie there is this kind of emptiness there that is sucked up by Rasputin. But in the play, like, they were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to engage with this. We're going to deal with this the best way we know how. Adding to this, like, hypothetical, like, link between Anastasia and fake news. This is, like, the Anastasia Broadway show is the response to, like, this is the post-fake news world response to Anastasia.
Interesting. Yeah, no, actually that tracks really well, because instead of Rasputin, they have this character, Gleb, who's the villain, who is a Soviet official. I don't know, they say what he is. He's like some important person, who basically is tasked with assassinating her when the Russian government finds out that she survived. But he has this great I don't even want to say it's a great conversation with her, because he's pointing a gun in her face. But what they talk about is very poignant, because he basically chases her across Europe, and when he finally corners her and he says, if you really are Anastasia, do you think history wants you to have lived? And it's like just this great sort of commentary on like the fairy tale that we still tell ourselves about this. Because her immediate response is like, yes, why wouldn't you? But it's like this musical brings out also like, what are the consequences of that? Like, if she is Anastasia, then her family's dead. She lived through something horrific. You know, she's got PTSD that pops up constantly throughout the show. Like, you know, what are the consequences if that's true? You know, there is the fairy tale and it's nice, but, you know, when you bring out the actual things that happened and acknowledge the history, like, what does that mean if it's true? Which I just thought was really, it's interesting because it's like, it's subtle and it's nice, and usually, you know, in something like this, it wouldn't play as well as it does. So I thought that was the strongest decision they made, was to make this villain, who was based on like their original idea for a villain in the animated movie. They originally weren't going to do Rasputin. They were considering a like St. Petersburg official, like some sort of St. Petersburg official authoritarian figure who had a grudge against the Romanovs, but they ended up not doing it. So it kind of got new life here.
Yeah. And I will say, like, he is possibly the most interesting character of the show, in a way, because he's the one who's dealing with the political versus, you know, like, and it's interesting in a way. They kind of split Dmitri into two characters in a way. Yeah. And then, you know, they kind of split him, and then one deals with, I don't know, it's very interesting what they did. And some people may not be fans of that because it's not 100% faithful to the movie, but, like, on a intellectual level, I appreciate what they did. I just wish that the music that isn't part of the movie, like, the new music would have been better. And maybe even revamp some of the music in the movie that does find it a little bit. I did find lacking a little bit. Mm-hmm. But because it is a musical, you know, so that is definitely like an aspect of the movie, of the show that we can't ignore. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, I wasn't, like, Dimitri is so swoon-worthy in the movie, but then in the show I was like, I don't care about it. Yeah, I was like, I don't care about you, Dimitri.
It's like, oh, your backstory.
Yeah.
Thing I didn't ask for. Yeah, it's interesting what you say, because they basically split Dimitri into two characters, which they kind of did, because it's like the entire movie, the entire show, Dimitri's kind of a jerk, and this guy almost takes, like, or he tries to take the spot of a romantic lead, because he's like his thing. It's kind of a love triangle, but it's like a love triangle that only Gleb knows he's participating in.
Yeah.
Like, everyone else is like, I don't know who this guy is. Where did you come from? Like, nobody else is like privy to this information. But yeah, like, he tries to be this dashing hero type person, and it's like, as the audience understand, it's wrong, it's off, something's bad about it, and they visualize it so beautifully at the opera, where you've got basically the characters singing their quartet pieces, and then at the opera in the middle of the stage is Swan Lake, with Anya as the princess, with Dimitri as the prince, whose name I forget, and then Gleb as Rothbar, and like, it's was that his name? Rothbert? Something like that. The bad guy, basically. Because, Swan Lake is about a princess who, is stolen away and becomes a swan by night, and doesn't know who she is when she becomes the swan, and the prince has to save her, and she was cursed by an evil sorcerer. But as each character sings their part in the quartet, the ballet dancers come out to dance and are like, dance their parts, and then when Gleb and Dimitri sing their bit together, they harmonize at one point during the quartet. Both the prince and the sorcerer are dancing with the princess ballerina. And they like beautifully merge the theme of Once Upon a December to the music of Swan Lake. And it's great. There's a lot of, that's the thing is like you said, like, the music in this isn't very strong apart from the songs that already existed. The beauty of this and its adaptation is in the subtle things it gets across that the film couldn't do because of the demographic it was aiming for.
Right.
But,
like, I'd love to see this animated.
Yeah, no, that would be really cool.
That would be Disney, remake it and actually make it like, full on.
They should do that thing where they like to remake all their old movies now into live action. They should do that with Anastasia now that they own it.
100%.
We should email Disney like your
we need
friend.
to find that email and send an email to Disney being like, yo, you should do the live action version, potentially hire us to be part of the process.
I'll write it. I've got it written for you. I can actually just hand you my script.
Like, we could just work something out, Disney. Just call us, Mickey.
Yeah,
call us.
I got you. I used to work for you. Does that mean anything to you? Probably not. But yeah, so these are all the things. And like I said, it is historically 100 years this month since the unfortunate things happened. Last year, 2017, it was the 20th anniversary of Anastasia, the 1997 film. And yeah, just fun stuff. Also, how old are you if it's the 20th anniversary of that film? But yeah, it's a cult classic. It's not a cult. It's a 90s classic. It's a cult film for 90s kids. It's great. I will always watch it. It's never on, so when I say I'll always watch it if it's on, I mean I've put it on and now I'm watching it. But we used to we watched that a lot when I was in college. Like, that was like the film we would put on just like on a rainy day. We'd be like, well, I guess we're gonna watch Anastasia now. Really, really great stuff. I
have a question for you. Did learning about Russian history in college and diving deeply into it, did that ruin the movie a little bit for you, or were you able to move past it because of your love for it? Yeah, I mean, at that point, I knew that, the movie was inaccurate. I'd studied it a little bit before college when I was a kid, so I knew a fair bit of, what was incorrect about it. I will say, it did make it kind of a bummer just to be, when I got to, sort of the end, my senior year, I was taking, it was,
what was it? It was like Russia 1816 to present, something like that, where, you know, the very beginning of the class, we talked about the end of the empire and the beginning of communism and all that jazz. And I remember just being bummed learning about that. And I was like, oh, yeah, that sucks. And like, they glossed over the Romanovs. Like, I could tell he was waiting for somebody to bring it up. And he was just not even going to open the door to that. Like, he was just like I remember.
What about Anastasia? Shut up!
Yeah, no, he very definitively, like, it was like a one sentence thing. He was like, and then they were killed. And then he like moved, and then he jumps 5 years into the future when like, I don't know, something was established, and I was like, oh, so you're not even gonna, you're just gonna, okay. So that, and I remember being kind of bummed about that, because it was just like, I was like, okay, yes, historically, this is what happened, and Russia, like, turned into a cesspool for a very long time after that. And it's interesting, so there's the thing with the history of this is that, like, sort of, encapsulates Russia in all of its many centuries of glory, is that it's always late to the party. It is always behind. It took until Peter the Great for them to modernize themselves. Like, they didn't free their serfs until 1860. Serfs. These things that, you know, you had in the Middle Ages. Like, obviously the United States was behind on that as well, since that was around the time they were freeing their slaves. But, so, you know, that happens. You know, they botch Marxism by trying to for once they try and get ahead of something, and they just completely botch the idea of, because I had this paper that I wrote for the end of my one class about how the Bolsheviks weren't real Marxists, because they totally messed it up. And I can't tell you the name of what I wanted to name the paper, because it is a bad word. And this is technically not a bad word podcast, because we're talking about a children's movie.
Right.
But it's a pun on Bolshevik. And if you want to know it, you can tweet me.
Why don't you tweet it out, like, after the podcast? Just tweet it out.
I'll tweet it out.
I'll retweet it with no context.
No context.
And only the people who will have listened to this podcast will understand.
To the very
Hashtag
end.
it. And once you reach the end of this podcast, you yourself, listener, hashtag and tweet out this tweet.
Yes, if you listen to the very end and then you check my Twitter and you see my tweet about the name of this paper,
Just tweet it out.
It'll be great. I don't know. I'll high five you, internet, something. I don't know. It'll just be fun. So yeah, I will tweet out the name, what I wanted to name. I obviously didn't name the paper this, but I really wanted to. But yeah, basically it bummed me out. I mean, it wasn't a huge, you know, it had already bummed me out when I was a teenager, when I was, you know, sort of self-teaching myself this stuff. But having that professor just completely, like, just full stop on it and then move on was kind of a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
But all it did was make me, when I watched the movie, like, make my friends hate me. Because I'd be like, well, actually, her title would have been, and they were like, shut up! I even did that when we went to go see the Broadway show, because she says her full name a lot. She's like, I am the Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanov. And I was like, that's not correct. I was like, she is the Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova.
Ah.
But, nobody cared.
They were just like, just sing Once Upon a December again. Just sing Journey to the Past again.
Yeah. So, yeah. If nothing, it just made me annoying to watch this movie with, because I will tell you all the things that are wrong.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But yeah. So, with that being said, if you'd like to find out all the info on this podcast, you can go to overlyanimated.com, where you can also join us on the Discord to text chat about animation at overlyanimated.com/Discord. I've been on there once. Maybe I'll
join us. You should go more often. You guys, it's so fun. I make a fool of myself all the time. Join us.
Fascinating. I don't know. People talk about it a lot. Maybe I should invest in doing it. Invest by which I mean just log on. There is no investment. Support us via Patreon at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to all our current patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Juliana. Is Julie Jana. And thanks, as always, to our Patreon executive producers, John, Ryan, Steve, Alex, Andy, and Hugh. Do you have anything you wish to plug of yourself?
Yeah, you guys can check out the YouTube videos I've made for Overly Animated on Overly Animated's YouTube channel. I've done some reacts to the Steven Universe episodes, and I do not they're not flattering for me, but they're fun to watch. And yeah, I also have a YouTube channel, which has been on hiatus, but I'm getting back to it, I promise. I have some fun stuff in store that I'll be doing, like, in a couple weeks. I think in a week. Anyway, so yeah, you can check me out at the Be Real channel. So that's B-REEL, the Be Real channel, or the Be Real movie channel. I changed it to channel instead of movie channel, but check it out. It's great. I enjoy doing it.
But yes, check out Beatriz's YouTube channel. Check out her self-proclaimed unflattering videos.
They're fun.
You can decide for yourself. Plugging, I have an article I tweeted out that I wrote for another website last week about Anastasia, if you'd like to read that for more context. If you want to be a cool cat like Hugh and read my book and review it, you can do that as well. Check out my book on Goodreads. I also have the link on my Twitter if you want to check that out. It's pinned at the top. Or maybe it's not. I think I pinned the interview. You can find the book on my Twitter. Check out, just search my name on Goodreads. There's a couple Melanie Moyers, but I am the one in the Hufflepuff shirt. But yeah, be like Hugh. And thank you, Hugh, for that awesome review. Yeah, so I think that about does it for this fun, depressing, and then fun again podcast episode on, 20th Century Fox's 1997 Anastasia, and that's all, folks. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. Hufflepuffs for life.